Hello, my name is PeterEntwistle and this is a new tutorial series which I'll be teaching you Python. So in this series I assume that you have no prior programming experience, although if you have learnt another programming language before, you can also follow along with it if you want to learn Python. But if you're completely new to programming and don't know where to start, I recommend Python as your first programming language. I'm going to try and keep these episodes fairly short, maybe a few minutes each, and try and teach a certain aspect of the programming language in each episode. This series will cover the basics of the Python programming language, and then in the future I may do some more in-depth Python programming tutorial series. So basically this tutorial series is to learn the basics of Python and programming in general. Here's a little bit of information about Python. Python is a powerful dynamic programming language which is also available on all the major platforms, so it can run on Windows, Mac, Linux, and as well as other major operating systems. So it's platform independent, which it also has a very readable syntax. It's a very high level programming language which makes it a very good choice for beginners. So again, that makes it easier to learn, which is why it's often recommended as a first programming language. But Python isn't just for beginners. It's very powerful and has lots of pieces of software that you can easily use to produce powerful programs and web applications. And best of all, it's open source and free, which means that there's lots of documentation online and lots of help for if you have any problems. Okay, so what is Python used for? Nowadays, Python is used a lot more on the web. Now, maybe 10 years ago, Python wasn't used much on the web at all. But nowadays, many big websites such as YouTube and Google are powered by Python. I may do a tutorial series on web development with Python in the future, but we won't go into that in this particular series. Desktop GUIs, or graphical user interfaces. So you can build a program that has a graphical interface quite simply just using inbuilt packages that are in Python, and I may show you that later on in this series. Cross-platform development. So Python is very popular for producing programs that run on all different platforms. So you could run the same code can be run on a Mac, Linux and Windows machine, and it will run exactly the same on each machine. This helps in the fact that you don't have to rewrite the entire piece of code again in another programming language. Game development. Python has been used quite a lot for 2D and 3D game development, although traditionally people would probably program in something that such as C++ for 3D game development, but it can be used for game development as well. I may do a 2D game development series in the future, but we won't cover that in this series. And there's also a lot of other different applications that you can use Python for that I've not mentioned. So that was just a little bit of information about Python and what it can be used for. I think Python is a good choice for beginners and for people who've already programmed in the past, because it can be used for a variety of different applications, and most of all I think it's a really fun language to learn. So I'm just going to quickly show you the place to download Python, but first I'm just going to point out that if you have a Mac or a Linux distro. Most Linux distros, I believe, come with Python pre-installed. Macs also already have Python installed by default, so you won't have to install Python. But if you're on Windows, you will need to download and install Python. So you're going to have to go to www.python.org/download. I'll just show you that page now. Okay, so here is the download page on python.org, and there's a number of different versions of Python that you can download. So we are going to be using Python 2.7.5 in this series. So we're not going to be using Python 3. The reason we're not going to be using Python 3 is because many of the programs and packages for Python haven't been ported to Python 3 yet, so most of the stuff on the web is for Python 2. So Python 2 is a very good, stable version, especially Python 2.7.5. This is the latest stable version. So you're going to want to download the correct version for your computer. As I say, if you have Mac or Linux, you probably won't have to install Python. If I had Windows, I would download the Python 2.7.5 Windows installer. You could also download the second one. It doesn't really matter for the purpose of this series. But in future tutorial series, especially for game development, we might need a 32-bit version of Python, and the Mac version is 64-bit by default. But for these tutorial series, it doesn't matter if you have a 32-bit or a 64-bit version of Python. So download and install the correct version for your computer, and it should be fairly straightforward to install. I think it's just next and then select where you want to put it, and then it just does all the work for you. Once you've installed Python, you'll need to go, if you're on Windows, you'll need to open Command Prompt, which I think if it's Windows 7 you should be able to click on the start and then type in CMD and then click enter. If you're on Mac or Linux, you'll need to find Terminal. On Mac, the terminal is in the Applications and Utilities folder. I'm going to be using Mac OS X for these tutorials, but you can follow along on any particular operating system, it doesn't matter. Okay, so first we're going to open Terminal and Command Prompt if you're on Windows, and we're going to type the words Python and then click enter. Okay, so after you've typed Python and clicked enter, you'll get a little message that says the version of Python that you've installed. So make sure that it says Python 2.7.5, and then after that you'll see these three greater than symbols or arrows, which looks like you would be able to enter something there, and that's because you do. This is known as the Python interpreter. So you can actually type a Python program straight into the interpreter. You don't have to even write any source code and run it. You can do it straight into the interpreter. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to make our very first Python statement. So the most simple program we can make in Python is one that just returns hello world or some other type of string. So in Python, just to say hello world, all we have to do is type print, then quotation marks, hello world, close the quotation mark and click enter. So once you've clicked enter after the print statement here, you'll get this hello world printed out on one line below it. So that is your first Python program, and I'm just going to quickly open a text editor and show you how to make a Python source file and then run it from command prompt or terminal. Okay, so to get out of the Python interpreter, I'm going to type exit, and then I'm going to use my curly brackets. So that is just a function which we'll get to in a later video, and then you click enter, and that will just get us out of the interpreter. Okay, so now I'm going to open a text editor, and I'm going to be using Sublime Text 2 for my text editor. You can use any type of text editor, so you could use TextEdit, Notepad if you're on Windows, but I'm going to use my favourite text editor. Okay, so I've got a new file open here, and I'm just going to do another Hello World program. Instead of writing it in the Python interpreter, I'm going to write it in a text file. So I'm going to type print, and then hello world, exclamation mark, and that is it. That's all we need. So we just save the file. I'm going to save it in here, and I'm going to call it hello.py. So I'm going to save that now. Okay, so now to run that file, all we need to do is we need to go into the directory where we saved the file. So for me, that's on my desktop, so I'm going to type cd for change directory, and then desktop, and then I called it Python tutorials. By the way, that backslash is just escaping this space here. Click enter, and now I'm inside the Python tutorials directory. So now if I want to see what's inside that folder, I just type ls, and we can see I've got hello.py. Okay, so to run that file, I just type Python, and then put a space, and then type hello.py. Then I click enter, and once again we get hello world printed out. So I know that wasn't the most exciting program, but I'll expand upon this in the future videos, and we'll get into more advanced stuff. I'm going to try and explain all the different things in the best way I can, especially for beginners who may have never programmed before. In the future videos, when I have more code, I'm going to upload the source code onto my website, and I'll put a link to that in the description of every video in this series. But for this particular video, I don't think I need to do that because it's only one line. So thank you for watching this tutorial, and I will happily answer any questions that you may have, and I will see you in the next video.